Yeah, well, what I've learned in the school of hard knocks
Mhm.
is that this earthly school is not for the faint of heart. So that gave me a lot of space for compassion.
Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm Rachel Astarte. I'm your host, and today I have as my guest Susan Gold. Navigating a ferociously challenging upbringing while bravely moving forward as an adult to face ingrained, outdated, and patriarchal programming head on. Susan now shares a unique perspective in viewing life challenges as occasions for transformation. We love that. That's what we're all about. Through her book, Toxic Family: Transforming Childhood Trauma into Adult Freedom, Susan turns the standard paradigm on its head, courageously leading others through her own journey of abuse, addiction, and surviving narcissism, all while creating a distinctly empowering personal and professional life. That's amazing. Susan, welcome to Self Talk.
Rachel, I want to hire you. You're such a gifted reader. You're an actress with reason and purpose.
It's so wonderful to have you here. And we are going to talk about those toxic family lines. What I really hope that we'll get into today is that self part of it, right? The relationship with self, moving through and past childhood trauma. But before,
Can we just go right there?
yes,
Because
but part of it
this,
is I want you to be able to share with us your story, like how you got to this. And I understand it's a very long and detailed story, but what I'm interested in is what motivated you to want to share this message, particularly through your book and the work that you do.
yeah, I didn't really want to share this message. In 2007, an Irish seer said, you have a book to write and it's going to help a lot of people. And I shoved that under the closest carpet. And then 2020 hit and I did back-to-back intuitive reads. And the third intuitive said, you've got 3 books to write. And I was like, fluff, before this turns into some kind of library, I guess I'll get going. I've just lived through a lot, as most of us have. But I've awakened. I've done tons of work, all different types of work, traditional and more somatic modalities to move through my life experience. And I felt I would be missing something if I didn't leave it behind for others, to see how I move through some pretty nasty stuff in hindsight. But as far as the self, I didn't really have space for self, certainly not as a child. My upbringing was chaotic. It could be violent. My father's a genius astrophysicist, still with us. My mother was equally as genius, but her chance at higher education never came. What came were 5 children in very short succession. And she soothed through food. And back then, when you did that, diet pills were immediately prescribed. So she was on speed. And my father was opening the dry sink at 7:30 a.m. and uncorking the whiskey bottle. And you hear glug, glug, glug. So my reality was a little askew in that kind of toxicity. And my parents were hurt
Mm.
and damaged children. My mother's father was brutally beaten as a child, and he was almost killed by his stepmother after a beating. And he foisted that abuse on my mother. My father's father was a big Peter Pan. He never wanted children, but my father's mother said, well, that's what you do. You have children. And she made up and compensated. And so my father thought women were to serve and to serve him. And he soothed, through alcohol, through food, through womanizing, through overexercise. And that's what was modeled. And I was very young when I realized this environment is completely askew. And I spoke up and out from an early age. I was highly empathic, meaning I could totally read the tone and texture and tenor of the room, just like you do, Rachel. And I was also telepathic. I could get full sentences until it became too dangerous. And I just planned and plotted my departure, which came the morning after I graduated from high school. I used to watch Barbara Walters on my beanbag chair in the basement on my belly. I just wanted to get to New York City as soon as I could and be like Barbara. And I was 19, living in Greenwich Village on my own on an internship from college. And then I returned immediately upon graduation, worked at ICM, which you probably know of, being the actress that you are. Couldn't make enough money at ICM as an assistant, so I picked up a side hustle. I was a personal exercise trainer, and Barbara Walters became my client.
Wow. That's a fairy tale, but real.
Totally real. My life's been very interesting. I've been a manifester since I'm young. I didn't know what that was. So much of this I've learned in adulthood. But my journey to find self has been a long one. I mean, to stay safe in my home environment, I became whoever you wanted me to. I was a complete chameleon. And I know you can identify. I'm just, shaking my head with you today and smiling. I could feel it. I could feel it when I first connected with you. And I never really had a sense of self. And the one that I did was not good enough, not worthy enough, did not measure up. I didn't know who I was. And I started, like my father had demonstrating, soothing through alcohol. And it was not for the taste. It was how soon can I get out of this carcass of being that I am encaged in. And I did the same with food. And I did the same with exercise. And it was a long journey to really come authentically to the place where I discovered my own power. Because, Rachel, on the outside, I was incredibly strong and very accomplished. Barbara Walters helped me. I rang her bell one day at 7 a.m. for our session. She opened the door herself. She took one look at me and she said, "Susan, get in here. What is going on with you?" And she was a great interviewer for a reason. She was highly intuitive. And within moments, she had it out of me. I'd been sexually harassed in the workplace the day before, and it brought up so much complex post-traumatic stress. I was barely functioning. She said, "I'm coming to work with you this morning. We're going to confront this man together." And I said, "That's okay, Barbara, I've got it, but thank you." And I did confront my boss that day. He promptly fired me. I was not even 90 days sober at the time. I had just extricated myself from an abusive relationship where the gentleman held the purse strings. And I was terrified. I had a couple months of money in the bank, living in New York City by myself. I knew that I could not fall back financially on my family, my parents. And so Barbara offered me a job assisting her then fiance at a huge film distribution company he was running. And I said, "Barbara, I cannot serve someone. I cannot be someone's assistant after this experience." So I opened my own talent brokerage firm, matching celebrities to brands. And my first deal was with Donnie Deutsch, who's an entrepreneur and icon in TV, now a host. But back then, he was running his dad's ad agency, and Pontiac was his client. And he said, "We really want Andy Warhol for this TV spot we've got. You think you can get him?" I'm like, "I don't know. Let me try." Well, nobody would answer the phone at the factory. So I took the subway down from the Upper West Side and I knocked on the door in my little white suit. And Fred, Andy's business manager, answered the door. And I explained why I was there. And he said, "Come back tomorrow and I'll let you talk to Andy." And I did go back. And I waited in the foyer, sweating bullets, and those double wooden doors to Andy's studio popped open. Fred stuck his head out and said, "Andy, we'll see you now." And it was pitch black in there. I was terrified. I thought, what is going to happen to me now? But there was a pin spotlight in the center of the room coming down on his platinum hair, going 17 different directions. And there was Andy scribbling away with 3 pugs, those dogs with those smushed up faces running around the studio and tugging at his pants legs. So I went into my spiel, why I was there, why he should do this commercial. He wasn't listening. He wasn't making eye contact. It was all about the dogs. And one of the skills was intuiting the room, reading the energy, understanding the emotion and the feeling. I could tell he wanted to connect. He wanted recognition, but he was so isolated inside his being. It was tangible for me. And I could feel his only connection were his beloved dogs. So finally, he stops his scribbling, and I shouldn't call it scribbling. And he looks up at me and he said, okay, really now, why should I do this spot? And I said, because you can have the pugs in the shot with you. And he said, okay, I'll do it. And that launched me, Rachel, on a very successful career, matching celebrities to brands and ultimately producing for TV and film and from New York to Los Angeles. But I still didn't have an authentic self, a strong, authentic self. And I was clean and sober. And I was going to all those meetings with an A on the end of them to learn about self. And I was doing all sorts of therapeutic modalities. And I was meditating and going on long meditation retreats in silence for 10 days. And I was doing marathons and I was doing triathlons and I was doing hot yoga 6 days a week, but I still couldn't find that elusive self.
Yeah. What do you think was stopping you from, it sounds like there was so much going on and you were still getting that accomplishment nourishment, right? So there wasn't much need besides the obvious part, like, I'm sober, right? So I did that for myself, right? But then there are all these other ways that you're getting supported and validated. Do you find that maybe kept you from going a little deeper, or you just didn't even think to look? How was that for you?
I was so busy following the dogma, following the systems that had been in place, because it wasn't just a toxic family, Rachel. It was a toxic educational system. It was a toxic spiritual system. It was toxicity within the medical healthcare field. It all came into play. And I was running as fast as I could to get away from that terror in my central nervous system that I would be annihilated if I didn't show up perfectly for Santa, dad, mom, the boss, the person I was doing the deal for, the particular studio, whatever it was. And it didn't stop until I finally met my greatest guru, as in teacher. And that was the man who would become my ex-husband.
Interesting. So tell us what shifted for you at that point.
I think it was perfect storm. Everything came together. Here I was in what I thought was my dream relationship. And the bloom came off the rose bit by bit, year after year. And I fought to hold on way beyond the expiration date. And it took a very graphic experience that I'm not going to go into now. But by surviving it, I could see my true value authentically, and I could feel my worth. And I broke probably one of my last addictions, which was to the approval of a man. I think since second grade in Billy Fritz, I needed that. And when one was falling, the other was set up. Mm-hmm. And so after this experience, I was able to take a 7-year hiatus and really go inward. And just getting through that experience helped me see that beautiful golden lusciousness inside of my heart, and that little one in there was worthy of me slowing down and starting to breathe and starting to find some semblance of nurturing and worth from the inside
Right.
out for the first time authentically.
Yeah. So it's not so much about, the external validation, which is something that we talk a lot about. Well, I talk a lot about with clients, but also on this program too. And you don't have to give an exact number if you're not comfortable, but what decade of your life were you in when you had this self-awakening?
The deepest awakening came in my fifth decade, and thank God it came. I'm so privileged, and I hope y'all listening will get it much earlier than I did, which was part of the reason I decided to write this book with exercises in the appendix to help and to leave this legacy and to start talking about it and to start shift. Because though I had this interesting career that looked flashy from the outside. And yes, I did. And yes, I was successful and I had great opportunities. What I'm doing now is my sole purpose. And this is the reason I'm here, to speak up and out and to show and share the light and the purpose of going through these challenges and to meet these challengers with love.
And I think that's a really big part of it too. And we can't do that unless we've done that inner work, right? And that idea of that we hear all the time, that you can't love anyone else until you love yourself. And that usually applies to relationships, but it really does also apply to just our interactions with others, that we don't need to please as much as we need to have that agape kind of love. Yeah.
I'll take it even a step further. I mean, for me, it wasn't just others. For me, it was with myself.
Yeah.
I mean, I was brutally beating my body up. I was training like an NC2A athlete, in adulthood and reaching for national titles in an arena I had never competed in. So it wasn't until I really stripped that away too that I could see, no, I had to start living for myself. Things didn't feel good. Simple things didn't feel good. I mean, in my 20s, I didn't know if I wanted spaghetti or Chinese food for dinner. And that sort of carried on.
Yeah, it's funny because something so simple as that kind of disempowerment of I don't even know. So for me, it was in my 30s. I looked around my apartment and went like, I have no idea who I am, and I better get cracking on that, because I don't have a clue, because again of trying to please the parental units in their in their own power and their own beauty. So I grew up in a different kind of household, but alcohol was certainly a big part of it. And yeah, there's we are the ones who, and you're a middle child as well, I take it. Yes.
Yes, I
I am a middle
am.
child as well. And so we're the hinge, we are the ones who hold it all together, or at least feel that we have to. So yeah, that's a beautiful, beautiful point. Um, I, I want to talk a little bit more about the childhood trauma aspect of it. Given what you went through, and it was so many different types of abuse that you experienced, and each instance, never mind each category, chipping away, right, at that wholeness, at that great majesty of who one can be or is. How do you come back from that? How does one come back from that without and maybe you do still have some of those voices, right, in your head that are echoing some of that, to put it in easy parlance, the negative self-talk, or the wounded child speaking to you. I know that there are many people out there who have had abusive childhoods and just don't know where to begin that work. Hi, it's Rachel here. If you'd like to dive deeper into your own self-development, but you're looking for an alternative to traditional talk therapy, I think you'll love the Foundation of Self Immersion program. For a full year, you'll get dynamic coursework you can complete on your own time, plus weekly coaching calls and monthly one-on-one sessions with me for personal support. Visit foundationofself.com and click on the events page for more information. That's foundationofself.com. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah, I was very mission driven. I was very awake as a child, understanding the system was broken that I was in and that it was wrong. It definitely eroded my self-worth, my self-esteem, just the own fabric of my being. But I had such a tenacity that I was going to survive it. And I was not only going to survive, I was going to be a success. So that was inherent within my personality. And there were moments when at my own hand of abuse. So I learned the abuse, right? As a child, and then recreated that abuse as an adult because I'm familiar with that. So I was then perpetrating similar abuse on myself. And it wasn't until I could finally, ultimately understand it to the core of my being. I mean, the billboard that had to fall on my head was horrendous. But when it fell, that's when I authentically woke up. Ultimately woke up, and that was to self-love. I patched it. I did well. I was a great trooper. I stayed sober. I worked my way through 10 years of clinical depression to a place where I understood how to work with that and no longer needed the medications. And then ultimately it was the narcissistic abuse that was so flagrant, and standing up to that ultimately is what really broke it open for me. And I want to say to the listeners, it can break open for you.
Yeah. And when we talk about, and thank you for that, because that's such an important message for people to really hear. And addiction so often does go hand in hand with that kind of abuse. Because as you say, what we often do is try to unconsciously recreate in one way or another the scenario that we grew up with so that we can fix it. And so that often will mean if you are the child of an alcoholic, alcohol can become a problem, or narcissism, or food issues, or whatever it might be. So what advice might you give to someone who is aware that they're grappling with an addiction of some sort, but they just don't know where to start, don't know how to get clean?
There's a lot of free help out there. There's those meetings with days if you want to try that. But you can also go to a trusted confidant. You can go to a spiritual mentor, and then there's such a proliferation of us light workers coming forward and sharing our experience and sharing our strength and sharing our hope. There's so much online, and if you feel called to me and you want to have a conversation, just go to my website at susangold.us, and it's all there because I firmly believe in it. I had so much help early on and all the way through, and I want to offer that to others as well. Your story deserves to be heard.
That's also really important for people to understand. Then I want to go back to something you said, and elaborate on that a little bit. You do not have to do this alone. In fact, it's almost impossible to do this alone. I speak from experience. So trying to do everything on I'm strong enough. I can take care of this. I got this. Right. And that is a mistake in many ways. And it took me decades to figure it out. But here's something that's so important too. Why we do this self-work in the first place. Right. So what are your thoughts about why do all this inner work? Why not just carry on and be successful in what you do and continue to survive?
I did carry on, but I did pretend. I did step up and act as if over and over and over again. And ultimately, I was in a cage. I was not free. And I knew it. I could feel it. And ultimately, I could no longer hide it from myself. And the universe did for me over and over and over again what I could not do for myself in bringing in these incredible life lessons that to some look absolutely monstrous, but that's what it took for me. So I embraced the lesson with a willingness and I walked through it with help and support. And I live in a new zip code, literally and figuratively. I am not living the same reality that I have, and I am so much more free. And you can be too.
I think that's also something that people really need to hear, not just the part about you don't have to do this on your own. In fact, you probably can't fully do it on your own, but that the change is possible and it starts here. It starts with you. And you said something also um, about your own awakening and the universe kind of giving you these chances. Isn't it amazing how the universe is so patient with us? If you miss that bus, here comes another because you can get on it whenever, and of course, the universe is not something out there. It's our highest self. And so that your story, and I'm sure people listening are thinking about their own stories right now. How many times have you been given and served the opportunity that may look monstrous for you to make a change? And I want to hear your thoughts on this, but my perspective is one of the things that stops us from really appreciating how many chances we get is that when we miss one, we feel like crap about it. We kick ourselves. I didn't make the right choice. I got into another crappy relationship. I fell off the wagon. Whatever it might be. And then we just kick our own asses. And I wonder if you might speak to how can someone navigate that when they, because no one goes into recovery and is immediately okay. It's a process, and there are times that we will fall and make mistakes and relapse, or whatever word you want to use. So how would you suggest, or how have you experienced worked well for you to manage those moments where we weren't quite where we wanted to be on our path?
Yeah, well, what I've learned in the school of hard knocks is that this earthly school is not for the faint of heart. And this is a tough place to be. So that gave me a lot of space for compassion. And every time that perfectionistic streak comes up, and believe me, it does. The decibel used to be at 10 plus. Now it's dialed down to about a 3. And I can see it when it comes up now. It's all about compassion. Is this the most loving action I can take for myself at this moment as I'm about to take another bite out of the ice cream gallon? Maybe not. And it's been a process of learning to be gentle with myself.
That's such a key word, the gentleness, and to treat oneself the way you would treat another beloved, right? Because it is all the same, and we are all connected. What? Let's ask this big question. If there is one thing that you could impart in everyone's mind and experience, a knowledge or a belief, or however you want to put it, what would it be? What do you wish everyone would just know about themselves?
To drop that word judgment of self of others, of circumstances, of ways of being, to just drop that word completely.
Love it. Yeah. And it doesn't really serve at all. It keeps us closed, keeps our hearts closed, and other people. Yeah. Beautiful. The book is Toxic Family, Transforming Childhood Trauma into Adult Freedom. The author and my wonderful guest today is Susan Gold. Susan, how can people find you?
If you feel moved, go to susangold.us. Everything's there. And I'm just starting to post some videos to YouTube that are proving pretty helpful. So you can find me there too, but just go to susangold.us. It's all there.
Okay, beautiful. I'll have, and you also are on Instagram and Facebook, I believe. I'll have all of those in the show notes. Susan, my goodness, thank you so much for being on Self Talk today.
Rachel, I just want to thank you for creating such a safe and beautiful platform to have an open and authentic conversation, because it's so needed. And what you're producing has value and worth. And I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Hi, this is Rachel Astarte from the Self Talk podcast. I'd love for you to send me your emails with questions or stories about yourself. What are you looking for? What are your questions? What are you grappling with in your own personal life that has to do with your identity, with yourself, with your very existence? These are the things that we're going to talk about during the podcast. And go ahead. It's all right. Get deep. I can handle it. So send them to Rachel@selftalkpodcast.com. And I'll see you on the next episode.